Good afternoon, everyone. We'll just give it a couple of seconds here while folks are joining the call. Thank you for joining. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. This is Edgar with Senator Alex Padilla's office. We'll be beginning shortly. Just give us 1 second while we wait for folks to log in. All right, looks like we're holding steady. Good amount of participants. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for a briefing on wildfire response and preparedness hosted by Senator Alex Padilla. We'll go ahead and get started in just a few moments, but just to provide a quick overview, we'll hear from all of our speakers first, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A from members of the press. But with us today, we have Senator Alex Padilla, Cal OES Director Mark Villaducci, Region 9 EPA Administrator Martha Guzman. We also have Cal Fire Deputy Director of Community Wildfire Preparedness and Mitigation Chief Daniel Berlant, and California Air Resource Board Deputy Executive Officer Chanelle Fletcher. Please feel free to submit your questions at any time using the Q&A function in the feature, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can in the time that we have. But without further delay, Senator Padilla, I'll hand it off to you for some opening remarks.
Thank you, Edgar. And hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for a timely and important briefing on California's wildfire preparedness, our readiness, and our response. As we begin yet another high-risk fire season, I'm proud to be working alongside many federal and state officials to improve our wildfire response at every single stage. California, having learned from many years, has certainly stepped up to increase our mitigation efforts, our preparedness strategies, and our suppression capabilities. And now that I'm working to ensure that the federal government does its part to help protect our state from the devastation of wildfires. For starters, I'm proud to announce the $3.4 billion that we secured in the bipartisan infrastructure law to reduce wildfire risk that was signed into law last fall by President Biden. I'm also proud to share that the down payment is already going to work in places like the Western Klamath Mountains, where a coalition effort is working together to protect 1.2 million acres of important forest land, rivers, and homes. The bipartisan infrastructure law also included a bill that I had introduced, the Power On Act, which has specific funding for the hardening of our electrical grid and the undergrounding of power lines. We know that in recent years, many of the major fires, including last year's Dixie Fire, started because of fallen power lines. So shoring up our electrical infrastructure is a key strategy for mitigating fire risk going forward. Now, this investment will help prevent fires and also decrease the power shutoffs that Californians face each summer. Today, you'll hear more from Cal Fire and from Cal OES about the current state of readiness in our states and their ongoing work. And I also want to note some of our pending legislation that I've introduced to further address the unique challenges of wildfire. And I'll start with talking about the Fire Act, which I've introduced to update FEMA's procedures to better respond to the unique challenges of wildfires. For example, we know that FEMA already pre-deploys resources and assets in advance of hurricanes or even tornadoes. So the Fire Act, my bill, would enable FEMA to take similar action and pre-deploy assets and resources when there's red flag fire warnings, those that we've become accustomed to here in California. When it's hot, when it's dry, when it's windy, we know that the potential for a devastating fire is way up, and we want to be ready. Proud to report that this bill has already passed out of committee. I'm a member of the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee, where this measure was heard and voted out on a bipartisan basis, and I'm going to continue to work to ensure that the full Senate takes it up and votes on it as quickly as possible. I'm determined to continue to use all the tools in our belt to prevent wildfires when we can, put them out quickly when possible, and help communities recover from wildfire emergencies. And in that vein, two additional bills I want to speak to that were introduced just last week that help put out fires faster and protect our communities from post-fire flooding in particular. The Fire Suppression Improvement Act and the Post-Fire Flood and Debris Flow Act will help us meet the growing threat of natural disaster from initial ignition to post-fire recovery. We know that last year's fire season was the worst in our state's history. And sadly, it's not an outlier. I think we said the same the year before that and the same the year before that. Because of the ongoing climate crisis, we're going to continue to see devastating droughts, severe weather, and historic wildfires. So we must act now to prevent wildfires when we can and prepare for these natural disasters. And wildfires, given their nature, require a whole of government approach. In addition to my partners in the Senate, I'm just so proud to be working so collaboratively with leadership at Cal OES, Cal Fire, as I mentioned, but also the California Air Resources Board and EPA Region 9. And before turning it over to the next speaker, I do want to offer a few brief remarks in Spanish as well for our Spanish language press. Muy buenas tardes. Estamos juntos hoy para esta sesión informativa sobre la preparación y respuesta a los incendios forestales aquí en California. Mientras comenzamos otra temporada de incendios de alto riesgo, estoy trabajando con funcionarios federales y estatales para mejorar nuestra respuesta a los incendios después y antes y mientras que suceden. Estoy orgulloso de anunciar que tuvimos $3.4 mil millones de dólares en la ley de infraestructura bipartidista que fue firmada por el presidente el año pasado para reducir el riesgo de incendios forestales. Pero sabemos que todavía hay mucho más que hacer. Es por eso que desde que llegué al Senado he presentado varios proyectos de ley que ayudarán a apagar los incendios más rápido y protegerán mejor a las comunidades más afectadas y más vulnerables. Tomará todos nuestros esfuerzos trabajando juntos para responder a esta crisis y me comprometo a hacer todo lo posible para prevenir incendios cuando es posible y apagarlos más pronto cuando es posible y recuperar de emergencias por estos incendios forestales. Gracias por acompañarnos hoy. And with that, I'm so looking forward to hearing from our partners on this call and continuing to work to keep Californians safe.
Thanks, Senator. Next, we'll hear from Cal OES Director Mark Gallarducci. Go ahead, Mark.
Great. Good afternoon. Thanks, Senator Padilla, and thank you for hosting this really important forum today. California and, in fact, the Western states continue to experience ongoing extreme climate-driven conditions. Multi-year drought driven by changing weather is resulting in hotter days, more windy days, and now a year-round fire threat. The governor has recognized this, continues to make this a top priority for California, and we are investing heavily in pre-event planning, mitigation, and preparedness across the state to build resilient communities, but equally in response capacities through increased equipment, personnel, and technology to help identify fire starts, assess fire spread, and more strategically apply resources to protect lives and property. Cal OES is also working closely with our local government fire and emergency management agencies, with Cal Fire and our federal partners, the U.S. Forest Service, FEMA, and others, to ensure there's a close coordination across all jurisdictions before, during, and after an emergency, especially a wildfire. In particular, through the California Fire and Rescue Mutual Aid System, we partner with local fire departments to supply equipment and leverage mutual aid assets to enhance alert and warning and pre-position strike teams in high fire threat zones, and to rapidly deploy strike teams and personnel the moment fire strike. These partnerships really are critical and especially important as California experiences more frequent and severe wildfires. We are also leveraging new technology as a part of our fire mutual aid system, and in partnership with Cal Fire, like new fire intelligence and reconnaissance aircraft and a wildfire forecast intelligence and information sharing center. At the same time, California is also focused on pre-disaster mitigation and enhancing community resiliency. The state has invested hundreds of millions of dollars in new programs and grants to build community resilience. And we recognize that disasters disproportionately impact the most vulnerable members of our communities. So through our Listos and Prepare California programs, we are working with local communities, tribes, and NGOs, investing to keep these vulnerable Californians as safe as possible from wildfires. Following wildfires, Cal OES moved swiftly to help communities devastated by these events to recover and rebuild. This includes removing debris, watershed mitigation, emergency sheltering, and reconstruction of critical infrastructure. But more is necessary. And that's why the Fire Act introduced by Senator Padilla is so critical. From streamlining federal mitigation regulations to rapidly reducing future impacts of wildfire, to building community resilience, to reducing post-wildfire mud flows, and by including pre-positioning of fire assets as a part of the Fire Management Assistance Grant and supporting local government and tribes with cost share and eligibility criteria. Most importantly, by streamlining and building consistency and equity in the application of federal disaster assistance. All these improvements outlined in the Fire Act will be instrumental in this all hands on deck approach to preparing for, responding to, and recovering from wildfires. Thank you, Senator.
Thanks, Director. We'll remind members of the press here on the call, if you have any questions, you can submit using the Q&A feature at any time. So next, we'll go on and hear from Region 9 EPA Administrator, Martha Guzman. Go ahead, Martha.
Thank you, Edgar. Thank you, everyone. It is needless to say a very known fact that wildfire smoke is a public health crisis. We know that unhealthy levels of smoke can last for weeks and months, and it's been recurring year after year given our climate warming. We can help reduce exposure by giving public information that is accessible, actionable, and can lead to effective interventions from smoke exposure. And I will be posting some links in the Q&A after I'm done. These are important clean air shelters, as we're calling them, that offer proper filtration. We're working to improve our tools and the public access to information. And one of these is through our app known as the Air Now Fire and Smoke app. And we worked in partnership with our sister federal agency, the U.S. Forest Service. This map makes it easier for you to help find localized, real-time air quality data and some of the trends. Is it getting better or worse? Gives you some advice on how to plan some of your activities and how to stay safe. In addition, we're working on additional research, and some of this through the bipartisan infrastructure law that Senator Padilla mentioned. We're focusing on communities that are most vulnerable, including those that have to continue to work in this air quality, especially farm workers and construction workers. They don't necessarily have the ability or disposable income to buy expensive air filtration equipment. And so we need accessible and ready tools to improve their air quality. One example is recently funded the Oakland's Public Health Institute that will be focusing on ways to reduce wildfire smoke exposure and health risks among agricultural workers and other low-income families. And the focus is to design and field test some affordable and effective filtration systems for rooftop evaporative coolers, which, as we know, often are used to cool homes in this increasing heat. We have additional research happening with the Central California Environmental Justice Network that will be focused in the beginning of next year and next summer, also on affordable do-it-yourself air cleaners. As we're continuing to manage through this crisis, we also are working in partnership with our sister state and federal agencies here on this call, CAL FIRE, OES, and the Air Board, on recovery. And our specific role at Region 9 is in wildfire disaster recovery work. We focus on household hazardous waste removal, often known as Phase 1. And much of that is possible through the FEMA mission assignment, of course, with Senator Padilla's support, and much of his proposed reforms would enhance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Administrator Guzman. Up next, we'll hear from CAL FIRE Deputy Director of Community Wildfire Preparedness, and Mitigation, Chief Daniel Berlant. Go ahead, Chief.
Great. Thank you very much, and thank you, Senator, for having us. As was mentioned, the effects of climate change, overgrown forests, prolonged drought, as well as increased recreation and housing in wildland areas have all contributed to a significant and record-breaking seasons of wildfires year after year. In the past 5 years, California has experienced not only the largest wildfires in our recorded history, but some of the most destructive. In fact, 18 of the 20 most destructive wildfires have occurred since the year 2000. Now, in addition to our year-round firefighters, we have already ramped up our seasonal firefighters and are staffing additional firefighting equipment like fire engines, helicopters, including our new Firehawks, air tankers, and even bulldozers. We've been preparing all winter long on fire prevention activities like fuel breaks and prescribed burns. We are ready, but we really need the public to do the same. Ensure you're prepared by focusing on defensible space and home hardening retrofits. Maintain 100 feet of defensible space by removing dead or dying vegetation 100 feet from your home. Trim up branches so they're away from your home. Trim them up so they're off the ground. Clear leaves, pine needles, and other debris from your roof and your gutters. And landscape with plants that are less flammable and often are more drought tolerant. Now, research has shown that the most critical area of defensible space is really that first 5 feet around your home. This is known as the Ember resistance zone. And in this area, we're really trying to keep fire and embers from igniting plants, bark, mulch, and other combustible materials that can spread the fire to your home. So tips like using hardscape in that first 5 feet, like gravel, pavers, concrete, and other non-combustible materials. Limit or even remove plants from this first 5 feet, and limit other combustible items like outdoor furniture on top of or even underneath your deck. And lastly, replace combustible fencing and gates and even arbors that attach to your home. Homeowners are also recommended to harden their home using Ember and ignition resistant building materials. So here are some tips, and many of them are actually low cost ways that you can do home improvements to harden your home. First, block any open spaces in your roof covering with non-combustible materials such as bird stops. Install non-combustible gutter guards to prevent the accumulation of leaves and debris. Install Ember and flame-resistant vents. Caulk or plug any gaps that are greater than 1/8 of an inch in your siding, and replace any damaged boards, including those that have dry rot. And then lastly, upgrade windows to multi-pane, including at least having a minimum of one of those panes being tempered glass. Now, as part of California's overall wildfire strategy, we are funding hundreds of millions of dollars over the last couple of years towards fire prevention projects. In fact, just today, we announced $118 million going out to local fire safe councils in cities and counties across California to fund 144 local fire prevention projects. Now, the 22 wildfire year is well underway. Already this year, we've responded to nearly 2,300 wildfires that have burned nearly 11,000 acres. Several widespread red flag warnings for high fire danger weather have already been issued. So the fire year is definitely here. Now, it's important to note that California's dry Mediterranean climate has lent itself to wildfires for centuries. And while we must take every step to prevent and to suppress wildfires, we must also learn to adapt. So I'll conclude with this reminder. Now is the time for all of us to get our homes, our neighborhoods, and our communities ready for wildfires. For more information on how to prepare, visit readyforwildfire.org.
Thanks, Chief. And before we head to our last speaker, I'll remind folks again, if you want to submit a question, please do so using the Q&A feature. Please identify yourself when you're submitting questions as well, if it's not listed in your name. With that said, we'll head to California Air Resource Board Deputy Executive Officer Chanelle Fletcher for some remarks.
Thank you so much. And as already shared, so my name is Chanelle Fletcher. I'm the Deputy Executive Officer of Environmental Justice at the California Resources Board, and we're also known as CARB. As shared by other speakers, wildfire smoke is a public health crisis and an environmental justice issue, as many of the communities most impacted by wildfire smoke are California's most vulnerable. And as many of us know, climate change continues to exacerbate wildfires. So we know that it is essential that we work with communities and agencies to address wildfires, the health impacts from these fires, and our collective efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. At CARB, we have several efforts to inform, provide guidance, and protect the most vulnerable communities in California during wildfire season. These efforts align and support the work that Senator Padilla has been advancing at the national level. So some of our key efforts include overseeing the AB 836 Wildfire Smoke Clean Air Centers pilot program to assist vulnerable communities during smoke events, development of the Smokespotter App to show locations of prescribed fires, and working with other state agencies and local air districts on guidance and best practices during wildfire events. Given our focus on vulnerable communities, I will focus on the AB 836 Wildfire Smoke Clean Air Centers pilot program, which had $5 million in funding in 2020 and has the goal of setting up a pool of clean air centers across the state to assist the most vulnerable communities. So this program really focuses on vulnerable communities. We really define that as low-income communities or communities of color, areas that are considered disadvantaged according to Cal Enviro Screen, people with pre-existing health conditions, and those who are unhoused or have housing that cannot provide protection from wildfire smoke. We work closely with the Bay Area, San Joaquin Valley, and the South Coast Air Districts, as well as the California Air Protection Control Officers Association, to distribute grant funding and roll out these clean air centers across the state. The grants really focus on building up those clean air centers and making sure that there's indoor air quality upgrades in terms of facility ventilation systems, high efficiency air filters for buildings, and purchasing of portable air cleaner devices for use in permanent and temporary clean air shelters. These shelters are run by cities, counties, air district, local offices, disaster relief organizations, with really the goal of focusing on how do we make sure that we're protecting the most vulnerable communities during these smoke events. One of the other things that I'll note and I'll flag is that we also talked about an app that we've created, the Smokespotter app. This can be downloaded again in Google App or in Apple. And the focus of this is really making sure that communities understand and know where and when prescribed fires are being planned, and so they can protect themselves from potential smoke impacts. We are also going to be upgrading the Smokespotter app to really show the location and details of current wildfires, the smoke forecast for wildfires, as well as the real-time kind of data from our community purple air sensors, so people are aware of the impacts of the smoke that they're breathing in. Again, I think our focus is making sure that all the communities have the data and information they need to make the right decisions in those moments. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chanelle. Appreciate it. All right, folks, we're going to transition to our Q&A portion of the event. Again, remind people, if you want to submit a question, use the Q&A function. We have a couple here. We'll start with Stephanie from NBC of Telemundo in Los Angeles. Question is, local agencies are glad to hear all this money is being designated for fire prevention and response, but they are worried that they won't see any of those funds. Is that the case? If not, how so? Senator, I'll go ahead and let you answer that first, and then maybe some of our panelists here as well can jump in.
Sure, I'll comment just briefly and invite Director Ghilarducci or Chief Berlant to add on as well. So the funding that we have secured comes to the state of California, and we entrust the partnerships and that collaboration and plans that have been outlined for many of the state and local agencies that work together to make sure the resources are directed to where they are needed. So again, Director Ghilarducci, want to talk about mutual aid or any other mechanisms for those resources to be shared to cover costs?
Sure, happy to share that. Well, let me just start off by saying a lot of the grant funding that has been made available from the federal government through the hazard mitigation grant program has been leveraged and pushed down to local governments in the form of hazard mitigation projects, home hardening, community retrofits, and generally wildfire preparedness. That has gone to fire departments and local governments and tribes, non-governmental organizations like fire safe councils. And the idea is to build out a more resilient community. As well, we've had state dollars that have also gone in the same arena, over $25 million in the Listos preparedness program for underserved communities and communities like farm workers and others that don't have necessarily always opportunity to get funding and or may not engage with government on a day-to-day basis. as well as $100 million to go into local governments to be able to cover the cost share of federal grants that may come in. So it's really a whole complete picture of 100% between federal dollars and state dollars, making it easier for local governments to be able to put in programs. And then lastly, through mutual aid, we have, of course, apply and supply, I should say, fire apparatus to local governments throughout the state of California in a very unique partnership. These are OES fire engines and other kinds of equipment, and we partner with local fire agencies. And the partnership is that they can use those equipment responding in their jurisdiction. But when we have a mutual aid call, we, in essence, can pull all these engines together in strike team formats and move them throughout the state. So it's really a win-win for a state and local government in that joint partnership.
And I'll just quickly add that while we are focusing ourselves on doing fire prevention work, in just the last 8 months, we've had 2 rounds now of local grant money going out to fire safe councils, cities, counties, tribes. Nearly $250 million were awarded this past fall and then just today. And so when you combine those two, about 250 local projects, and that's been a critical component for us to really be successful, is in order to build the capacity that's needed to do this work, we have to rely on our local partners to get work done in their communities. And I'll just take real quick connected to that. I know Karma had asked about local projects in the Sacramento area. We have several areas within the Sacramento region and really across the state that have received projects. I'll just note, one part of some of the other topics that were mentioned, we too are focusing on making sure that we're getting the resources to vulnerable populations. And so we do a lot of focus on that, but making sure that these projects are spread out across all regions of California is also a big component. So we can follow up later on specifics in the Sacramento region, but I just stress these projects are on all ends of the state.
Thanks, Chief. Looks like we have time for one more question here. We'll go ahead with Kelly from KRCR from Redding, California. Question is, are state leaders working with federal partners to ensure a faster response to fires that happen on their land? And that's the question. I don't know if anyone...
I'll start as well and invite the others to chime in. But Kelly, this question speaks directly to the Fire Act legislation that I've introduced that we referenced earlier in the conversation. I know at the state level and at the local level, folks have way too much experience to know how to anticipate and try to get ahead of wildfires when they happen. At the federal level, it's FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, that we point to, that has a lot of great experience in responding to natural disasters and anticipating them. And some of the best practices that they've learned from getting ready for hurricanes, getting ready for tornadoes, given weather monitoring, we can anticipate when those disasters are going to happen, put response equipment and key supplies in place in anticipation. But FEMA's current protocols and procedures don't necessarily reflect that when it comes to wildfires. Wildfires is relatively new for them. So we have a bill in Congress that would update FEMA's policies and procedures to anticipate wildfires and better prepare for them as well. In California, we're all too familiar with red flag warnings when it's going to be a very hot day, it's been very dry, and the winds are high. We know that's a recipe for disaster for fires. And so if we can anticipate when those days are, put assets in place, prevent fires when we can, have a much quicker response and contain fires is more quickly. That's part of the objective here. And of course, continue to support communities on the back end to recover from fires when they do happen. Director, Chief, anything else?
Thanks, Senator. I mean, I echo all those statements. I think that, Redding and Shasta County is no stranger to wildfires and impacts from wildfires. We've had multiple major wildfires impact that region year in and year out, and a number of them have become designated as presidentially declared major disasters. As a result, the community there has understood and felt the positives and negatives of federal response through FEMA the programs that are made available, and which ones can operate faster and which ones don't operate that fast. Clearly the bill that the senator speaks about will help streamline that response and recovery through the process. Whether it's pre-positioning of assets, whether it is pre-disaster mitigation, streamlining those regulations to build a more resilient community in a faster, more efficient way through the recovery process, being able to provide individual assistance to more people who need it after a disaster has impacted their community, changing the criteria up so that it's more, I guess would say equity driven and supportive of the folks that need the assistance the most. These are all aspects that will be addressed in the bill, and really to the senator's point, FEMA is an exceptional organization that does tremendous work throughout the country. We're a key partner with them, and we couldn't do it without them. But when it comes to wildfire, I think they're catching up to speed. They're used to dealing with a lot of hurricanes on the East Coast, and they're rapidly learning. And so these would be areas where I think we're collectively actively working on this stuff and hope to do better in the coming years.
And I'll just mention that while California is separated jurisdictionally, local fire departments, federal fire agencies, and CAL FIRE, we are constantly coordinating with our federal partners, with Cal OES for local response. We are integrated. Our operational centers in Northern and Southern California, both are co-located with our federal, our Cal OES representing our local partners. And so there is coordination occurring every minute of the day when wildfires break out. Again, we may have different jurisdictions, but we are always ensuring that resources are provided based on priority to life threat, property, and natural resources.
Thanks, Chief. I want to be respectful of folks' time. Unfortunately, we can't get to all the questions, but to everyone on the call, you all have my information, and I'll be following up with some additional information referenced by our speakers here, as well as a copy of the recording for this event. And then I'll kick it off to you, Senator, for any final remarks. If not, we can end right here.
Thank you, Edgar, and thank you all the panelists for participating today, providing some timely and important information for all Californians to be aware of. First and foremost, want to let the public know that yes, federal officials and state officials are working together on a daily basis, not just to respond to wildfires when they happen, but in anticipation and in preparation to do what we can to minimize their impact, minimize the damage, and continue to protect communities. And it's also a call, as Chief Berlant mentioned earlier, for each of us to do our part, whether it's to conduct ourselves in a safe way when we're out and about in federal land, state parks, et cetera, or what we can do to protect our own homes, respecting and complying with local brush clearance mandates and everything else. We're in for another hot summer. We're in the third year of a significant drought. And so let's all do our part to minimize the damage that wildfires can have in California. Working together, we'll get through it together. And we hope this information has been helpful to all of you.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you, everybody.